of the Mabul, and how this is directly reflective and directly related to us, Eden in general, and Yeshiva Bochim in particular. Okay, if anybody doesn't understand the word I say, please ask, because we would like everybody to be with us. You know that the central message, the central theme, the central occurrence of the Parsha was the flood, the Mabul, which was a horrifying episode to think of it. There was water all over, and the water really flooded the entire world, wiped everything out, completely devastated, because the waters were not calm waters. They were turbulent waters, turbulent. They were active. They were pushing. They destroyed everything. And miraculously, Noach was in this box, 300 amas long. 300 amas long is approximately 600 feet. And, excuse me?
It was a box, it wasn't round on the bottom?
It says a box, a teva. There's no implication that it was round. Certainly it was made of wood. It wasn't made of steel like modern boats. And it says in the Torah, Vayizgoy Hashem ba'adoi, that Hashem sealed off, Hashem protected him. In other words, this was a miracle that he survived the flood without any incident. And then inside this box were all the various animals of the world. They are not used to living in a little box for a whole year. Do you realize? It's a complete year. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says, you also will come across of it in the actually today, Pasha, I think, that Noach was actually attacked by a lion because he was late in bringing his lunch, so he was attacked. This is not a picnic, not a trip to the zoo. He survived the flood. He came out of the flood. He didn't know what to find. The earth was soft, was not walkable. And then slowly he watched it dry up until it dried to its norm, to the proper level. Then he came out and he started building a new world. This entire episode, which by all accounts, the way we would look at it, we would say it was a tragic piece of history. The Torah refers to it as Noach. True, the name of the person who was involved was Noach, but actually it's referred to in Tanakh and other places, Noach. Noach means easing, making things peaceful and calm. The Mabul is considered a means by which the world came to a calm, to a peace with itself. And then there is one very telling, very obvious message in the Torah. And that is, we learn at the end of the previous Pasha, Pasha's Bereishis, when the Torah describes how Hashem has made a decision to wipe away the world. And it says over there that Hashem says, I'm regretful, I regret having created the world. Because men are thinking evil throughout the day. Rak olayeh, he's thinking bad, evil all the day. And I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. I'll have to wipe them away. After the Mabul, after the desert, after the flood, Noach came out of the teva, of the ark, of this box. And he brought korbanos, and it says that Hashem responded to these korbanos, to these sacrifices. And he said, never am I going to do this again. Never am I going to wipe out the whole world. And he says the reason for that is because the yetzer, the thoughts of man are evil from start. Almost the same reason that originally directed Hashem's decision to destroy the world, now became a reason for safeguarding the world, guaranteeing its continued existence. What happened? How did it turn around that the same reason that originally destroyed now became its safeguard? That became its safety, became a reason to keep it, a reason to guarantee and never to destroy it again.
The question is, the reason for wanting to try to destroy it is now the reason why he won't destroy it.
Right.
Okay.
How can it be?
Yeah.
What happened? How did it turn around like this?
It gives the appearance that Hashem changed his mind.
Excuse me?
It gives the appearance that Hashem changed his mind.
Okay. Yes, it does give the appearance that Hashem changed his mind. And there must have been some type of fundamental change as a result of the flood that changed the situation. And this is what we are going to try and identify and understand. Another point that I want to bring up, and then together this will help us understand what happened over here. Up to the flood, we know that Adam Harishon was given, he was granted, he was relinquished into his hands the entire world. God said to him, this world is for you, it's yours. And he said that all the vegetations, all the fruit of the trees, and all the vegetables, everything is yours to eat. It's for you to eat. Yet, at that time, he only permitted him to eat the vegetation. He didn't permit him to kill an animal and eat. This was not permitted. After the flood, this you'll still learn in a couple of days, God said to Noach that I'm now relinquishing, I'm now giving into your hands all the animals as well. Just as I gave Adam all the vegetations, now the animals are also yours. And that is where the beginning was, when human beings were permitted to kill animals and eat. And we know that subsequently, after the Torah was given, it's a mitzvah in certain cases to eat a meat. Today we have a mitzvah to eat meat on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. This all happened after the flood, or after the change of the flood. What happened? The difference between before and after the flood is that before the flood, whatever existed in the world and whatever was recognized, whatever was understood, was known, was all a natural phenomenon, a natural process. God created the world, and from day one, when people were created in this world, they started developing normally. They did not recognize that they, the human being, has some kind of an input, some kind of a job in this world. They took everything for granted. There is a world. The world before the flood was what one would call a world of blessing. There was abundance. You know what abundance means? Unlimited resources. Everything was just available. At the end of the creation, of the seventh day of Shabbos, at the end of Shabbos we say, Asher bara Elokim la'asos, which God created la'asos. La'asos means to make, to do. What does that mean? God created everything. What needs to be made? The answer is that yes, God created everything, but it still needs to be perfected. Still needs to be, as we pointed out many times, God told Adam Rishon, you should be fruitful and multiply and fill the world and capture it and subdue the world. We had the human beings came to the world to transform it, to humanize it, to make it a human world, not a jungle. This is the job that God has given to the human beings. Before the flood, because the human beings came to the world from a perspective, from seeing the world as accepting it for granted, as an existence. This whole thing that human beings have to work and have to develop the world didn't exist. Noach, it says Noach was the first one who invented the wheel. He gave people the means by which to till the land. Up until that time, they just went with what they had. There was no development. There was no human input. There was no sense that a human being had a job to do in this world. This world was just taken and accepted for granted. We know, you've learned, that in fact there were many tzaddikim before the flood as well. Many tzaddikim. For one, it is mentioned Mesushelach. You may remember. Rashi says that Mesushelach died before the flood, and the flood was delayed for 7 days in honor of the mourning of Mesushelach, because he was such a great son. Mesushelach's father was Chanoich. He was altogether a spiritual man. He just disappeared. He didn't even live out his days. God took him away from the world. And Rashi says, why did God take him, Hanoich, away from the world? because he was a very big tzaddik, but he was sort of kal b'daitei. He did not have the capability of recognizing how to deal with the world. And if he were to be exposed to the world, he would have lost himself. Because people at that time did not have the sense of resistance, the sense of judgment. What is right and what is wrong, and if I have a right and a wrong, I have to make a choice. They did whatever came natural to them. And they had the ability to do that. As a matter of fact, you would wonder, Noach built the ark. It says that Noach built the ark 120 years. It's quite a duration of time. And during this time, people came to him and said, "What are you doing?" And it became very well known that he's building the ark because it's going to be a flood. Because God is going to destroy the whole world unless they repent. Nobody even gave it a thought. Nothing happened.
That was all before? Before it was only mercy, and then you decided to put both together? Mercy and judgment?
You're way above us here now, okay?
What about Mr. Sheller?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Sheller did it out from Mr. Sheller.
And the whole, even Noach himself. It says the difference between Noach and Avraham was that Avraham set it out as his purpose to go out and teach and confront people. Noach didn't have that. Noach did his own thing. People came to him and asked him, so he told them. It wasn't an effort, and it wasn't an effort on Noach's part, and the people were also not in the mind of recognizing that they had to do something. They had to recognize what is their purpose in life, or how do you live. The world, in other words, was taken for granted, and people followed, so to speak, a life of their preference the way they wanted. Then came the flood. The flood destroyed everything. So that now, when Noach came out of the ark, he didn't come to an existing world. He started building a world from scratch. From the beginning, from nothing. And everything that existed in the world after the flood was all due to his effort. There were no fruit trees. Nothing would happen. If there was a fruit tree, it was because a human being planted it. Nothing was there naturally by itself.
But he had the plants also, besides...
Everything. Everything. That's what Rashi says. He brought with him Yehuda Te'enim. That's everything. He planted everything. Had to start over from scratch.
Was there an olive tree?
No, there was an olive branch, a leaf.
There was no tree, though.
There was no tree. A leaf was floating around. So that now, after this flood, the people who came out, who started building this new world, had a completely different view, a different perspective on what's going on. They recognized we are not here just to enjoy the world. We are here to build. And it all depends on us. What we do, that's what's going to happen. This is illustrated in our lives by the growth of a human being. Before the Mabul, the whole process of birth and growth and development was totally different. Totally different. The Gemara says that before the Mabul, certainly very early on in the Gan Eden, people were born fully developed. They were not born as infants who couldn't take care of themselves. They were fully developed. The Gemara says, Kibnei Chov. Kibnei Chov means like one who is today like 20-year-old. They were in full capacity of whatever they need to do.
How big were the people?
A lot of questions that are difficult for us to kind of join together. But I want to draw the point of it. The point is, how can a human being face the world without growing up and developing? He doesn't know anything. The answer is, he didn't have to know. He did the way he naturally wants to do. Now, it's a completely different process. A baby is born an infant. It cannot do anything for itself. The only thing it can do is cry. And then it learns how to suckle. It learns how to drink and how to eat. Then it learns how to crawl. It learns how to stand up. It learns how to walk. All of that is a whole process. So that when a person stands up on his feet today, he knows how he got to this point that he's able to stand up. And he understands what that means. It took a whole struggle. It took a whole effort to get up on your feet and to learn how to walk and then to learn how to talk and learn how to learn. Everything was a struggle. Everything was an effort. It was a human effort.
Nobody ever grew up?
I'm sorry?
Before Noach, they were fully developed, no babies ever happened? How did it just all from cave?
That's what the Gemara says. It was a different kind of process completely. This process, this is what defines this new world as a world, what's called a human world. The animals lahavnu, an animal, the minute the animal is born, within a half hour it runs on its legs. Doesn't have any development to go through. Not because the animal is advanced, is smarter than a human being. Not at all. But rather, the reason an animal doesn't have to develop is because an animal doesn't have to know what it is that it's doing. If I feel like running, so I run. A human being has to weigh. You know what weigh means? Judge. He has to identify, understand what is it I'm doing. And in order to be in control and to be able to judge what he has to do and what each one of his faculties represent, the ability to stand up, the ability to walk, to talk, and to do anything, all that has to come to him through a learning process. This is what makes him a full-fledged human being. That he is aware and understands what it is that he is doing and what it is that's going on. This explains, just take a little jump, this explains the fact that after the flood, God said to Noach that now everything, your animals are also yours. Because in fact, who brought the animals into the world now? Noach. Now the animal, the whole world, now is dependent on the human being. Not like before, the animals were a separate creation and the human beings were separate. The reason that there are animals in the world now is because a human being was instrumental in saving them. Everything belongs to the human being, even the animals. As a result of this change, which is a completely new approach to life in the world, where a human being has a sense of responsibility, and he knows that he has to deal with opposites, he has to deal with good and bad. This is why we see that at that point God said, the human being is evil from the start. But that is not a reason to destroy him. Why? Because now the human being knows what it is about. He is evil from the start, and he is confronting it. He is dealing with it. He is fighting it. He's trying to understand what is good and what is evil. He's not just following it just the way it comes. He knows that there is evil and there is good, and he has to make a choice. He's not accepting things just the way they appear, just the way they come his way. So now this is a reason to preserve the human being. Because when he recognizes that he has evil, and then he confronts it, he fights it, he is challenged by it, then there is a completely new good coming out, a good that comes out of the evil, a good that is much superior than the natural good. And therefore it becomes a reason for preserving the human being. Because with this he can reach heights that he wouldn't be able to reach otherwise. And all this came about as a result of Noach having gone through a flood, which means that he recognized that there is such a thing as complete destruction of the world, and then you have to rebuild it. Because Adam Orishin also was the first man. When he came, there was nothing there. But he did not see destruction. He did not see the evil. He only saw the positive. It's coming through. Noach saw both. This is why it says that actually the flood represented a purification, a cleansing of the world. Not just destruction, but a purification. Purification. That's why it says that the flood was 40 days and 40 nights, and that corresponds to the 40 saw of a mikveh, because it had a different effect. It's a new world. And then, even though there is still evil, and the evil starts with the person, as the Rashi brings down in the Chumash, that you will learn, that the evil comes from a person from the moment of birth, even before the Yetzer Hara is there. But still, because the human being now knows that it's his world, he has to make it work. It's not something that he is just going to accept and run with it. He has to work with it. He has to understand what it is about. So therefore, that evil now becomes actually a power for good. Because when he confronts it and he fights it, and he understands good from evil, he becomes a real good, a much more powerful, a much more a bright and meaningful good. It's not a good by default, it's good by intent. I don't know if anybody understands these words. Doesn't happen, the good doesn't happen by itself, it happens intentionally. As I mentioned before, that this is actually reflected in the growth of a human being, in the fact that a human being is born an infant, and everything that he knows, he has learned. Everything that he knows, he has consciously experienced and learned. Nothing is there automatically. Could be a person who reaches the age of 20, he doesn't remember when he learned that, but he definitely learned it, and he definitely recognized what it is that he is learning. So that he knows that in everything there is good and bad, and in everything can be used for the good and for the bad. There was a story, it's a story, I may have mentioned it here over the years. There was a story of a little boy. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It says that an infant, a baby, just before it is born, a malach comes and teaches the baby the whole Torah. The neshama, he learns the whole Torah. And then, the moment of birth, just before he is born, the malach comes and makes him forget it. Makes him forget this whole Torah, all that he learned. So the value of this learning is that he already had that experience, and then when he learns it again, he can more easily relate to it. He doesn't remember anything, but he can more easily relate to it. That's what it says. So there was an actual story, this is going back some 50 years ago. What I personally remember when the story was alive, and I also met a person who said to me that he actually met this little boy. It was a little boy who did not forget. He was born and he really remembered the whole Torah. Right, the mother forgot to give him a Schnell. Whatever it is, he really remembered the whole Torah. Nobody realized what was going on. He came to Cheder, he came to school, to first grade, and they started learning Bereshis, Borah came to Shemayim V'Zoharet, and this kid started saying further, he knew everything by heart. He came to learning the Shnai Mechas in Betalis, he started rattling everything up. So he remembered everything, but he didn't experience learning it. As a result, it didn't have any meaning to him. And this actually prevented him from learning anything. So you think, oh, it's great, it's a tragedy. Because nothing had any meaning. He didn't have to use his brain to understand what's going on. And he was really a living Torah, but he didn't know anything. He was a perfect idiot. And he couldn't get to learn anything.
Why couldn't they teach him scouts?
He couldn't have. He knows it. You have to challenge. Learning is through a challenge. Oh, what is it? But there's no challenge. There's no way to learn. So they took him. I remember then they took him to the Belzer Rebbe, the Alter Belzer Rebbe. And the story was that the Belzer Rebbe gave him a blessing. He blessed him that he should forget it. He should forget the Torah. I didn't hear what the end was, but I'm assuming that the bracha was in Skyrim. With that, I met somebody who was in Eretz Yisrael, and he said that he actually met this little boy. He stood with him on the street corner, and he wanted to kind of get a feel what's going on. So he started saying a Mishnah by heart, and the boy started rattling off what he said. Started rattling off with him. So, the fact that we are challenged to us, everything that we need to know, comes to us through effort, through hard work. This is not just to make it difficult, but this is to make it meaningful, so that everything that we learn is something that we have identified with our own brain. We don't just accept the way things are. We actually relate to it. We actually understand what it's about. And then we know what to do with it. And then we are able to transform the evil into good. So this is reflected, as we said before, in the normal process of a child. Taking this a step further and translating this and explaining how this continues on throughout the development, the growth of a child, which brings us to our own situation here. We are not children anymore. Each one of us has experiences. Some more, some less, some are older, some are younger, but each one has come here with a lot of experiences. So one would say, look, I already see the world. I know how to walk, I know how to talk, I know how to run, I know how to drive a car. So what am I missing? Why do I need to sit here in yeshiva? The yeshiva period is like being submerged. They probably heard that. Submerged. Underwater. Submerged in the waters of Torah. Just like the world was submerged in the waters of the Mabul. The yeshiva is the period when we are submerged in the waters of the Torah. And what does that give us? That gives us the understanding that when we are later going out into the world, we are coming out from the world of Torah. So that, just like Noach in his days, when he came out of the teva, come out of the ark, excuse me, when he came out of the box, he didn't take the world for granted. He didn't just accept, oh, it's there. He knew that he has to now understand the world from a new view, from a new perspective. He has to start building. So too, when we come out from being from a yeshiva, from being submerged in Torah, and submerged in Torah means that we know only what it says in the Torah. During this period that we are here in yeshiva, we know only what it says in the Torah. Like for instance, it says in the Torah, Bereishis bara Elokim hashamayim v'haaretz. God created the heavens and the earth. So while we are here in the yeshiva, this posuk in the Torah tells us that there is a world. Without this posuk in the Torah, we don't know that there is a world. So this is not, so to speak, a play. The point is that when we go out to the world, we know that this world which we are now looking at, this world that we have to deal with, is not a world that just exists there. This is a world that God created, and that God created for a purpose and with a reason. And He gave us the tools by which we can understand how we're supposed to live in it, how we're supposed to deal with it. This is essentially, this is in principle, the difference between a person being exposed to the world without being prepared by Torah and a person who comes to the world from a Torah experience. A person who comes to the world without having the experience of a yeshiva, of a Torah, of a yeshiva, of Torah submerged, to him the world becomes a reality in and of itself. So that he takes for granted that there is a world. And if he takes for granted that there is a world, then he has to respect the world. Then the world becomes his boss. But the world naturally demands that becomes his boss, that becomes his guide. This is what he has to do. But when he comes from a Torah perspective, then he is the boss on the world. Then he guides himself. He leads his life. He makes the decisions. What is right and what is wrong. Because he is the one who defines what the world is. Let us say simple illustrations. This is something which I hope after being in Yeshiva you will be able to understand fully. But this is something which, as I remember it, people used to come over when I was a child and they said to me, "You're not allowed to switch on a light switch? What kind of work is that? That's not work on Shabbos. That's not work. Work is when you go to the office or you go and you dig ditches. That's work. A light switch. You can't carry a handkerchief. You can't ride a car. What kind of work? How stupid is this? The world doesn't recognize that as work. The Torah has a completely different definition. Totally different definition of what is the world and what is work and what is allowed, what is not allowed. So, if one comes from a worldly perspective, from the world is very real to him, and you tell him you can't switch on a light switch, even if he accepts it, it becomes difficult to him. It still doesn't make any sense. Because looking at the world, it's not work. But when he comes from a Torah perspective, when he has this experience, a yeshiva experience, where he sees everything from a Torah, from a godly perspective, then it begins to make sense to him. He learns about it and he thinks about it, and it makes sense. What I'm allowed to do in the world, what I'm not, what I shouldn't. This is true regarding, I said, this simple illustration of a light switch. But this is true in the entire spectrum of life. When you take a spoon, a perfectly clean spoon, and this spoon was a milk spoon, was in hot milk, and then it was put in hot fleshike soup. So now the spoon became not kosher, right? Rov. So you look at this spoon, it says you can't use this spoon. You can't use this spoon for hot because it's not kosher. What's not kosher about the spoon? Does it have germs? What's wrong with the spoon? If we look at the world from a worldly perspective, even if we obey, we don't cross fingers, Sadiq. Even if we obey, we say, okay, I accept what the Torah says, it becomes, we can make sense of it. We can relate to it. The only way that it can make sense and we can relate to Yiddishkeit in the Torah, in the world, is if we look to start with at the world from a Yiddishkeit, from a Torah perspective. This is, so to speak, this is the flood. This is the submerged. This is the experience of the yeshiva, where one literally does not recognize the mitzias, the presence, the existence of the world, except for the fact that the Torah says that it's there. Just like Noach in his day, who was instrumental in creating a new world, to the extent what God said, this world I'm never going to destroy. And the reason why he was able to do it is because he looked at the world from the perspective of what needs to be made. He didn't accept it for granted. He has to create it. We too have to create a world. Each one of us has to create our own world. And we do not need to be mispoiled. Thank you.
You what?
To be affected, to be influenced. So, Rusak,
What was the word you used?
mispoiled.
Be?
Mispoiled.
Oh, it's
Mispoiled, to be affected. If somebody comes to us and says to us, there is nothing wrong with this spoon, there's nothing wrong with switching on a light switch, it's not work, there's nothing wrong, on the contrary, that's a great thing. You make it light, you make it bright. It's nothing wrong with riding a car, otherwise you walk on Shabbos. Walking on Shabbos is permitted, you get exhausted. Riding a car, you're not allowed to, it doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't it say Shabbos you're not allowed to use fire?
Of course you're not allowed to. I'm not talking about what you're allowed to, what you're not allowed to. Of course we're not allowed to. I'm saying that it should make sense to you. You should be able to relate to it. You should be able to stand up, huh?
Work is making fire. That's called work. Anything that makes fire is called work.
The question is whether this is the world will recognize this. And these become these little things that now are insignificant because you are in the issue. But you have to understand that these can become real questions. And the yeshiva is what gives you this submerged in Torah. This is what gives you the perspective that this is you have a completely different view on the world. Not just what's allowed, what's not allowed. You are now going to build a new world according to the way it's defined in the Torah. And that world is guaranteed by God Himself. This is never going to be destroyed. This is going to be guaranteed that it's going to be preserved, and it's going to give you the opportunity to build it and to grow with it and to be successful. This is essentially what we can clearly draw, can clearly learn from this pascha, from the flood. Here we come from a flood, a destruction of the world. Similarly, you come to yeshiva, you're destroying your world. Instead of preparing yourself to prepare yourself how to earn money, how to build, how to do something in the world, you go and sit in yeshiva and you learn what it says in the book. You're being impractical. You're destroying your world. Impractical, right? Unreal. That ultimately gives you the real world. That gives you a world in which you are the boss. You define what it is. And that is the only world that is guaranteed by God Himself. This is never going to be destroyed. Because this is a human world, this is a world with responsibility, with a godly purpose in it. This is for sure never going to be destroyed.
Is there a reason that God didn't give us the Torah in the beginning, so the world would have been destroyed?
Absolutely, there's a reason. Absolutely. Because the world had to be